Hi guys, it's Jackie from the Famished Farm. Welcome to my new video blog. This year is the year of minimizing, the year of simplifying. It is my personal year of minimal me. And for me, what that means is I'm trying to shrink my body and I'm trying to shrink my possessions. So also thinking about my calendar, my checkbook, ways that I can simplify things, make everything more efficient. So that's what this blog is going to be about. I hope you'll join me. If you're interested in it, hit like and subscribe, and please leave a comment. That's how we're all going to learn something from this. So I hope you'll join me. So I'm starting in the kitchen. The kitchen, most people have a limited amount of space. I have a nice sized kitchen. It's not huge. I have a big refrigerator with a freezer on the bottom. That's my only cold food storage, is that refrigerator. Got a little bit of canning stuff down in the basement from the garden. But what I noticed over the holidays is I, at some points, couldn't even close the freezer door anymore. So I've identified three things. First is too much meat. There's too much meat in there, so let's work on that. Three is I canned some cranberries, fresh cranberries to make juice concentrate. I've got that pulp left over, so that needs to get used up. And this that I showed you, this calendar from 2023, what's creating all of that thickness, this is how thick it should be. This is my 2024 calendar. This is all recipes that I've ripped out of magazines. I have printed them off the internet. You know, every viral recipe that you feel like would fit your family, it's in there. And 90% of them I haven't ever tried. So the last couple of, well, since I did the canning, so it's been well over a month, almost 2 months probably. Since I did that, I've started accumulating cranberry recipes that I thought would work. And so these are the 5 winners. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to cook and see how these recipes work and if it does really use up what I had to use up. I'll tell you about the recipes. First off, we're making from Half-Baked Harvest the cranberry beef bourguignon, which is adapted from an Ina Garten recipe. And seriously, the only difference in her recipe and pretty much the method is the addition of the cranberries, which is fine with me. She's a great cook. So you're starting from a good place. The problem is that I really didn't read the recipe thoroughly and also read the comments, leave the ratings from the everybody else that's made the recipe. Many of these people said that the time, 2 hours in a 250 oven, wasn't enough time, and it was not. So I'll let you know where I screwed up and what I should have done. All of these recipes, I will tell you, all are delicious. There's a couple of them that are exceptional and that will be in our not a weekly rotation, but come cranberry season, these are things that I'm going to use on a weekly basis. So the second recipe from Bailey at thegayglobetrotter.com. This was maybe my favorite recipe. It's a savory cranberry meatball. And again, we adapted it to fit things we like, things that I've got. I didn't want to have to go buy spices I did not have. Very good recipe. From Becky at thescratchpantry.com. I've tried this one before. This is very good. Cranberry Catalina chicken. We made it with chicken breast, and that's what I had. And I didn't have thighs. And I didn't have cranberry sauce, but I did have that cranberry pulp. We'll talk about the other changes as we go. Delish.com is our last of the savory dishes, and this was for a cranberry balsamic chicken. We had this last night. Really good. It didn't use a lot of cranberries. It only called for half a cup of fresh. I used a half a cup of pulp, and honestly, it was probably a little too much cranberry. It could probably use less. So is it going to get rid of, I store them in 1 cup baggies. No, it's not going to get rid of a whole baggie, but it's every little bit helps when you're trying to plan a meal, a week of meals that has some variety, that everybody's not going to go crazy eating the same leftovers day after day. And finally, a sweet recipe, and this I've made before, very good, from stephaniesdish.com, cranberry orange bread. And it's a really good recipe, but again, I screwed this one up a couple times, so we'll talk about it. The bread, we're still eating on the little one. It's good. I'm going to eat every crumb of that. It's that good. But that's our 5 recipes. We'll get to the cooking in a minute. I cooked the other day, so you'll see a change of clothes. Please stick around, leave your comments. Love having you here, and let's learn some stuff together. I'll have other videos as we start dejunking, and again, I need all the help I can get. Okay, beef bourguignon, or beef burgundy. Starts out with a chuck roast. Cut it in 1-inch cubes. That's me hacking away with a steak knife. It's still slightly frozen. Then there's 2 onions there, thinly sliced, and some carrots. You're going to sear that meat, give it some nice color. I hate doing this, but I do it. And then with some cognac, you're going to reduce this. You're going to soften the carrots and onions and reduce the cognac. I use beef stock. I don't have cognac. Salt your meat. You will want to use more salt than I used. And then the rest of the sauce, a bottle of good red wine, some thyme. They call for fresh. I don't have fresh. I use dry, and just a little bit. Some bay leaves, some beef stock, and then some, I had frozen tomato paste in the freezer, obviously. Mix that up. I should have been reading the directions better. I did not. Oops. That was the fresh cranberries, or the cranberry pulp went in. Now, this all goes wrong here. This should be on the stovetop in a Dutch oven, coming up to temperature, not in my cold stock slow cooker. I'm just thinking I'm going to slow cook it. Well, I didn't have enough time, so I put some foil on it. It went in the oven, and where it did not cook quick enough. This is the mushrooms, not creminis. I use baby bellas, and we'll saute them with some oil and put some salt on them. That will help the moisture weep out. I love sauteed onions. Oops, sauteed mushrooms. And I'm probably trying to remind myself to reread the recipe, which I did not do. There's the sauteed mushrooms. I can smell them from here. Yum. Then next up is the quick bread. So flour, sugar, baking soda. Oops, not baking soda, baking powder. I made that mistake a couple times. I'm going to have to reprint this recipe so I don't screw that up again. She has you put all your dry ingredients together, kind of fluff them up, mix them up good, and then make a little well. This is my technique. And put your wet ingredients. So your yogurt, some milk, which I forgot, half a cup of melted butter, the eggs, a little bit of orange juice, some vanilla extract, and don't put the eggshell in. And then I just use a fork to kind of mix up the ingredients that are in that little well. So you're kind of mixing up your wet ingredients. And do that good, and then start to mix the whole thing. So at this point, you're going to add your cranberries and your nuts. Oh, nuts is my addition. You don't have to add nuts. I like nuts in quick breads. And I don't care what the final product looks like color-wise. If you mix this up like I did, you'll get maybe some kind of weird colors. If you care, then you're going to carefully fold or marble those cranberries into the batter. You're not going to mix it up like I did. It tastes the same either way, doesn't matter. And then I try to get my bread pans so the tops don't stick like they've been doing. So I go back old school, some cooking spray, some flour, move that around in the pan. I did that to the little pan too. And then dump your batter in. This recipe, I had made it before and it overflowed the pan. So we did a little pan too. Got it about right, except for one thing, which you will see later. Then here they are in the upper oven, I guess we did. Here are the balsamic chicken recipe. This is thinly sliced chicken breast. Use thighs, use whatever. Sear it good. Don't move it around till you have to. Let it sit there. Get a good sear on. Do both sides. And then next up, we've got Becky's Catalina chicken with cranberries. Use chicken thighs or chicken breast, whatever. I said I use cranberry pulp instead of the cranberry sauce. Some ketchup, white sugar, red wine vinegar, which I didn't have, so I used apple cider vinegar. And I don't grate my onions. I just chop them. I use dry garlic instead of her minced cloves. Some Worcestershire, and definitely cut back on the oil. In fact, this time I think I only did a quarter cup. There was too much oil the first time, so I just cut that back a lot. Salt and pepper, squeeze it up in the freezer bag, throw it in the freezer. Easy peasy. So we're back at the stovetop with some butter in the cast iron, and you're going to prepare the sauce for the balsamic chicken. And that's basically whatever balsamic I had left in the bottle. I would use a quarter cup of pulp instead of the half a cup of fresh. Some dry garlic. I didn't have rosemary. I couldn't find it. I used dry thyme instead of the fresh. And a little brown sugar and some orange zest. And I just kind of let this reduce on the stove top a little. And actually I'm getting the cranberries to thaw all the way. And then put the sauce right on the chicken. Delicious. Okay, we are back. That is a timer for our cranberry orange bread. And this will be, big mistake. Let's take that. I'm prone to overfilling pans the last couple times. And we'll see if we can get this up without causing it to fall. I think that's good. And honestly, that feels pretty good. And up next is the savory cranberry meatballs. And we talk a little bit about, it calls for ground beef and ground pork. You use what you've got. I always have ground turkey. And like my sister always has ground venison. You do what you want to do. You add some milk, some eggs, some breadcrumbs, and it calls for fresh parsley, which I don't usually have unless it's garden season, but I always have, dried parsley. So that's what I'm adding. And then the other thing is it calls for a package of French onion soup mix, and I doubled this recipe. So that would be 2 packs, which I know for us would be just too salty. With 1 pack divided between 2 recipes, it was perfect. It was delicious. Now, mixing with my hand, if you prefer, you use gloves, whatever you like. Here I'm getting that bread out of the pan, after 10 minutes cooling, and it comes out perfectly. So yes, I have to go back to flouring those pans. And then over here, we're working on the sauce for the meatballs, and it calls for olive oil, shallots, which I always just use some onion. This time I think I used dried onions, a little bit of dried garlic. You use cloves if you like. And then it calls for fennel. I don't like fennel. I don't like anise. I really don't care for the licoricey smell. But I had caraway seed, so that's what I end up using there. And it calls for crushed. I gave away my mortar and pestle, so I'm just going to use the back of a spoon and crush those, and it smells so good, and it brings back a memory of really great bread that we must have gotten somewhere that had fennel on the top. Now, here's a big mistake. It calls for 1.5 pounds of fresh or frozen cranberries. Folks, I didn't read that correctly. I read that as 1.5 cups. So I put in 1 cup of cranberry pulp. And when I'm tasting the sauce after adding the brown sugar, the maple syrup, a little bit of water just went in there, some rice vinegar, and then some Dijon. It's really sweet, and I just knew something was wrong, but I didn't read the recipe correctly. But I soldier on and discover that extra cup of cranberries, which I added before I cooked it to each of the bags I end up making that go into the freezer, and it was delicious. Here's that last loaf of bread coming out, and it tests out great. Looks beautiful other than the grill marks. Our meatballs are coming out of the fridge now. The breadcrumbs have hydrated, and I use my large ice cream scoop to scoop up the mix. I really hate doing meatballs. I really should have made a 4 times recipe. The bread looks great. It's going to come out of that pan after 10 minutes, and it is delicious. And here is after 2 hours in a 250-degree oven. Fork tender? No. Back in the oven. And then here it is an hour later. I'm just praying it's fork tender. No. So I make the executive decision to put everything in my slow cooker with the nice tight fitting lid that is not oven safe. And I did that because I had other stuff to do the rest of the day. I didn't want to have to think about it. It can just sit and stew away in the slow cooker. And I did add the mushrooms and the roux that goes into. Now, here's the sauce that we have for the meatballs, and I end up divvying that sauce into 4 portions. 2 that go in with the meatballs, and cook the meatballs before you do this. It's just easier and takes less time coming out of the oven. I didn't do that, wish I had. And then I'm going to add, it reduced down to 3 cups, this sauce. So I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup in each of these Ziploc bags with the meatballs. And then I have another Ziploc bag that I'm reserving to make this recipe again, that I'll add some more cranberry pulp to and save that for later. These were absolutely delicious. I will make these again. This will be on when I make juice from concentrate, this will be on the rotation. It's delicious. And they go in the freezer. And there goes that extra sauce into a Ziploc bag that I put what it is, so I'll figure out what to do.
So the cranberry beef bourguignon. Here's the changes I made to that recipe. I did not use chopped cut up bacon. I used pre-cooked bacon with bacon grease that I got out of my refrigerator for the oil when I was searing the beef and cooking the carrots and the onions. I did not use fresh garlic, I used dried. I did not use the cognac, I used beef broth. I didn't use fresh thyme, I used dried. I didn't use fresh cranberries, I used pulp. And the mushrooms were not creminis, I used baby bellas. So those were the changes I made to the ingredients, and obviously I made a lot of changes to the instructions. If you have a Dutch oven, this recipe probably works perfect as written. For me, trying to improvise my slow cooker, it just didn't quite work. But it's delicious. I probably, next time I make it, will cut back on the wine, but the cranberries were a really good addition. And I will put this on rotation. And the leftovers that I have in the freezer, I will use them, but I will put them in the slow cooker for half a day on low, and I bet it will be delicious. Cranberry orange bread, very good, very moist, quick bread recipe. The recipe calls for baking powder. I use baking soda and powder, and I added walnuts. The cranberry pulp, as she writes it, is a little difficult to understand, but I used 1 cup of pulp. Very good recipe. The browning was on the outside is perfect. Because I mixed the cranberries throughout the bread, the coloring on the inside is a little different than if you had just swirled or marbled it per her instructions. These savory cranberry meatballs were so good. So quadruple the recipe, right? So on the ingredients, I substituted ground turkey for ground beef. I used a half a package of the French onion soup mix per recipe. I used onions instead of shallots, dry garlic instead of cloves, and the seeds I used were caraway crushed. And read the recipe, guys. It's 1.5 pounds of fresh or frozen cranberries. I used, of course, cranberry pulp and dry thyme instead of fresh. Now, that was my big mistake, is the not reading the recipe. My mistake, it was corrected by adding the additional 1/2 cup per recipe of cranberry pulp. And cook your meatballs first before freezing. It worked, as you can see, worked fine. It took about 40 minutes, 45 minutes baking. This was another really good one. The chicken was so tender and moist. Cranberry balsamic chicken. I use thighs, or I use breast instead of her recommendation for thighs in the recipe, and cranberry pulp instead of the fresh cranberries. The only modification I will make for next time is to use 1/4 cup of the cranberry pulp. Everything else I would do as she suggests. Oh, I did add a little bit of orange juice I had left, and basically I was trying to use up a container of orange juice, and I kind of mixed that into the sauce as before it went into the oven. Again, delicious. Won't use up a ton of your cranberry pulp, but it is a great dish to go into the rotation.
So the cranberry Catalina chicken, I used chicken breast instead of thighs. The cranberry pulp instead of the cranberry sauce, apple cider vinegar instead of red wine vinegar, and 1/4 cup of oil instead of the 1 cup. I think that's the major. Oh, and I chopped the onions instead of grating them. All in all, I'd recommend sweetening up your cranberry pulp a little bit before it goes in this recipe. I think that's what I must have done the previous times. The recipe, everything is accurate, the temperature and the cooking times. This is very good, very tender, and we use the leftovers for salads at lunchtime. Just a great recipe. Well, guys, that was fun. I filmed for 3 hours and 40 minutes, and that was basically cooking 5 recipes, 6 if you count the doubling of the meatballs. I have 3 meals in the freezer that I'll be able to use down the road. A night maybe we're tired, I just don't feel like cooking, whatever the reason. So that's a good future surplus of ideas that I won't have to think about. Looking ahead on the minimizing journey, I have identified 6 things in my cupboards or my freezer, wherever, that need to be used up. So first off, if you guys have ideas on these, it would be appreciated. Leave them in the comments. I have dill pickles, strawberry jam, orange juice in the freezer, a bag of nutritional yeast, a bag of malt flour, and bags of chia and flax seeds. So help me out if you can. And if not, I just hope your minimizing journey is going well, and good luck in 2024.